Cluedo, or Clue in North America, is a murder mystery game for 3 to 6 players, devised by Anthony E. Pratt from Birmingham, England and currently published by the United States game and toy company Hasbro. The object of the game is to determine who murdered the game's victim, where the crime took place, and which weapon was used. Each player assumes the role of one of the 6 suspects, and attempts to deduce the correct answer by strategically moving around a game board representing the rooms of a mansion and collecting clues about the circumstances of the murder from the other players. Numerous games, books, and a film have been released as part of the Cluedo franchise. Several spin-offs have been released featuring various extra characters, weapons and rooms, or different gameplay. The original game is marketed as the classic detective game, while the various spin-offs are all distinguished by different slogans. In 2008, Cluedo, Discover the Secrets was created as a modern spin-off. History: in 1944, Anthony E. Pratt, an English musician, applied for a patent of his invention of a murder mystery-themed game, originally named Murder. The game was originally invented as a new game to play during air raids in shelters. Shortly thereafter, Pratt and his wife presented the game to Waddington's executive, Norman Watson, who immediately purchased the game and provided its trademark name of Cluedo. Though the patent was granted in 1947, due to post-war shortages, the game was not officially launched until 1949, when the game was simultaneously licensed to Parker Brothers in the United States for publication, where it was renamed Clue along with other minor changes. There were several differences between the original game concept in that initially published in 1949, in particular, Pratt's original design calls for 10 characters, one of whom was to be designated the victim by random drawing prior to the start of the game. These 10 included the eliminated Mr. Brown, Mr. Gold, Miss Gray, and Mrs. Silver, while renaming Nurse White to Mrs. White and Colonel Yellow to Colonel Mustard. The game allowed for play of up to 8 remaining characters, providing for 9 suspects in total. Originally there were 11 rooms, including the eliminated gun room, and cellar. In addition there were 9 weapons including the unused bomb, syringe, schiller, fireplace poker and the later used axe and poison. Some of these unused weapons and characters appeared later in spin-off versions of the game. Some gameplay aspects were different as well. Notably, the remaining playing cards were distributed into the rooms to be retrieved, rather than dealt directly to the players. Players also had to land on another player in order to make suggestions about that player's character through the use of special counter tokens, and once exhausted, a player could no longer make suggestions. There were other minor differences, all of which were later updated by the game's initial release and remain essentially unchanged in the standard classic detective game editions of the game. Equipment: the game consists of a board which shows the rooms, corridors and secret passages of an English country house called Tudor Mansion, although previously named variously as Tudor Close or Tudor Hall, and in some editions Boddy Manor or Boddy Mansion. More recent editions have restored the name Tudor Mansion to the mansion, and say the mansion is in Hampshire, England in the year 1926. The game box also includes several colored playing pieces to represent characters, miniature murder weapon props, 1 or 2 6-sided dice, 3 sets of cards, each set describing the aforementioned rooms, characters and weapons, solution cards envelope to contain 1 card from each set of cards, and a detective's notes pad on which are printed lists of rooms, weapons and characters, so players can keep detailed notes during the game. Suspects: depending on edition, the playing pieces are typically made of colored plastic, shaped like chess pawns, or character figurines. Occasionally they are made from wood or pewter. The standard edition of Cluedo comes with 6 basic tokens representing these original characters. Miss Scarlet is a red piece. Professor Plum is a purple piece. Mrs. Peacock is a blue piece. Reverend Green is a green piece. Colonel Mustard is a yellow piece. Mrs. White is a white piece. Weapons: the playing tokens are typically made out of unfinished pewter, with the exception of the rope, which may also come in plastic, or string depending on edition. Special editions have included gold-plated, brass-finished and sterling silver versions, which have appeared in a variety of designs. Candlestick, dagger, lead pipe, revolver. Beginning in 1972, all editions typically now represent an Allen and Thurber pepper-box revolver. Rope, spanner, rooms. There are 9 rooms in the mansion where the murder can take place, laid out in circular fashion on the game board, separated by pathways overlaid by playing spaces. Each of the 4 corner rooms contains a secret passage that leads to the room on the opposite diagonal corner of the map. The center room is inaccessible to the players, but contains the solution envelope, and is not otherwise used during gameplay. Colored start spaces encircle the outer perimeter which correspond to each player's suspect token. Each character starts at the corresponding colored space. A euro denotes secret passages to opposite corner. Rules: at the beginning of play, 3 cards a 1 suspect, 1 weapon, and 1 room card a are chosen at random and put into a special envelope, so that no one can see them. These cards represent the facts of the case. The remainder of the cards are distributed among the players. Players are instructed to assume the token suspect nearest them. In older versions, play begins with Miss Scarlet and proceeds clockwise. In modern versions, all players roll the dice and the highest total starts the game and then proceeds clockwise. Players roll the dice and move along the board's corridor spaces, or into the rooms accordingly. The aim is to deduce the details of the murder. That is, the cards in the envelope. There are 6 characters, 6 murder weapons and 9 rooms, leaving the players with 324 possibilities. While determining the details of the murder, players announce suggestions to the other players. For example, I suggest it was Reverend Green, in the hall, with the revolver. I suggest it was Colonel Mustard, in the conservatory, with the spanner. I suggest it was Professor Plum, in the billiard room, with the dagger. I suggest it was Mrs. Peacock, in the dining room, with the candlestick. I suggest it was Mrs. White, in the library, with the rope. I suggest it was Miss Scarlet, in the kitchen, with the lead piping. The player's token must be in the room they suggest. Suggestions may not be made in the corridors. The token and weapon suggested are moved into the room, if not already present. The player to the left of the suggesting player must then disprove the suggestion, if they can, by showing the suggesting player one of the cards containing one of the suggestion components, as this proves that the card cannot be in the envelope. This is done in secret so that the other players cannot see which card is being used to disprove the suggestion. If a player has more than one such card, they may select which one to show. If the first player to the left of the suggesting player does not have any of the 3 cards needed to disprove the suggestion, the next player clockwise must disprove the suggestion, if possible, and so on clockwise until either the suggesting player is shown a card that disproves their suggestion, or each player advises that they cannot disprove the suggestion. The suggesting player's turn then ends. The suggesting player does not advise the other players whether they hold any of the 3 cards. Once a player has sufficiently narrowed the solution, that player can make an accusation. According to the rules, when you think you have worked out which 3 cards are in the envelope, you may, on your turn, make an accusation and name any 3 elements you want. Players may name any room. The accusing player checks the validity of the accusation by checking the cards, keeping them concealed from other players. If they've made an incorrect accusation, they play no further part in the game except to reveal cards secretly to one of the remaining players when required to do so to disprove suggestions. Also, according to the rules, if, after making a false accusation, your character pawn is blocking a door, you must move it into that room so that other players may enter. If the player made a correct accusation, the solution cards are shown to the other players and the game ends. A player can use the piece representing the murderer. This does not affect the gameplay. The object of the game is still to be the first to make the correct accusation. All editions of the current version of the game are advertised as a 3 to 6 player game only. Traditionally, the UK version was advertised for 2 to 6 players. Strategy: though gameplay is relatively straightforward as described above, various strategies allow players to maximize their opportunities to make suggestions and therefore gain the advantage of accumulating information faster. As alluded to above, Blocking the entrance to a room is one way to prevent an opponent from entering a desired room and making a suggestion. Choice of suspect. The first opportunity is in choosing the initial playing piece. Mrs. Peacock has an immediate advantage of being one space closer to the first room than any of the other players. Miss Scarlet has the advantage of moving first. Professor Plum can move to the study, and then take the secret passage to the kitchen, the hardest room to get to. Navigating the board, your next opportunity is choice of initial rooms to enter. Again, Mrs. Peacock has an advantage in that she is closest to the conservatory, a corner room with a secret passage, enabling a player on their turn to move immediately to another room and make a suggestion without rolling the dice. Miss Scarlet has a similar advantage with the lounge. Making as many suggestions as possible gives a player an advantage to gain information. Therefore, moving into a new room as frequently as possible is one way to meet this goal. Players should make good use of the secret passages. Following the shortest path between rooms then is a good choice, even if a player already holds the card representing that room in their hand. As mentioned earlier, blocking passage of another player prevents them from attaining rooms from which to make suggestions. Various single-space tracks on the board can therefore become traps, which are best avoided by a player when planning a path from room to room. Making suggestions. Each player begins the game with 3 to 6 cards in his hand. Keeping track of which cards are shown to each player is important in deducing the solution. Detective notes are supplied with the game to help make this task easier. The pads can keep not only a history of which cards are in a player's hand, but also which cards have been shown by another player. It can also be useful in deducing which cards the other players have shown one another. A player makes a suggestion to learn which cards may be eliminated from suspicion. However, in some cases it may be advantageous for a player to include one of their own cards in a suggestion. This technique can be used for both forcing a player to reveal a different card as well as misleading other players into believing a specific card is suspect. Therefore, moving into a room already held in the player's hand may work to their advantage. Suggestions may also be used to thwart a player's opponent. Since every suggestion results in a suspect token being relocated to the suggested room, a suggestion may be used to prevent another player from achieving their intended destination, preventing them from suggesting a particular room, especially if that player appears to be getting close to a solution. Note-taking. One reason the game is enjoyed by many ages and skill levels is that the complexity of note-taking can increase as a player becomes more skillful. An amateur may simply mark off the cards he has been shown. More advanced players will keep track of who has and who does not have a particular card, possibly with the aid of an additional grid. Expert players may keep track of each suggestion made, knowing that the player who answers it must have at least one of the cards named. Which one can be deduced by later events. One can also keep track of which cards a given player has seen, in order to minimize information revealed to that player and/or to read into that player's suggestions. Editions. Parker Brothers and Waddingtons each produced their own unique editions between 1949 and 1992. Hasbro purchased both companies in the early 1990s and continued to produce unique editions for each market until 2002/2003 when the current edition of ʻkluːdoʊ was first released. At this time, Hasbro produced a unified product across markets. The game was then localized with regional differences in spelling and naming conventions. During ʻkluːdoʊ's long history, 8 unique Clue editions were published in North America, including miniaturized travel editions. However, only 3 distinct editions of ʻkluːdoʊ were released in the UK, the longest of which lasted 47 years from its introduction in 1949 until its first successor in 1996. The 8th North America and 4th UK editions constitute the current shared game design. International versions occasionally develop their own unique designs for specific editions. However, most drew on the designs and art from either the US or UK editions, and in some cases mixing elements from both, while localizing others specifically suspect portraits. While the suspect's appearance and interior design of Dr. Black's Mr. Boddy's mansion changed with each edition, the weapons underwent relatively minor changes, with the only major redesign occurring in the 4th 1972 US edition, which was adopted by the second 1996 UK edition and remains the standard configuration across all classic detective game versions since. The artwork for the previous US editions tended to reflect the current popular style at the time they were released. The earlier UK editions were more artistically stylized themes. From 1972 on, the US editions presented lush box cover art depicting the 6 suspects in various candid poses within a room of the mansion. The UK would finally adopt this style only in its third release in 2000, prior to which Cluedo boxes depicted basic representations of the contents. Such lavish box art illustrations have become a hallmark of the game, since copied for the numerous licensed variants which pay homage to Clue. Marketing: Cluedo was originally marketed as the Great New Detective Game upon its launch in 1949 in North America, and quickly made a deal to license the Great New Sherlock Holmes game from the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle estate. Advertising at the time suggested players would take on the guise of Sherlock Holmes following the path of the criminal, however no depictions of Holmes appears in the advertising or on the box. By 1950 the game was simply marketed as the Great Detective Game until the 1960s, at which time it became Parker Brothers Detective Game. But the association with Sherlock Holmes was far from over. With the launch of the US 1972 edition, a television commercial showed Holmes and Watson engaged in a particularly competitive game. Adjusting with the times, in 1979 US TV commercials a detective resembling a bumbling Inspector ʻkluːdoʊ from the popular Pink Panther film franchise, looks for clues. In 1986, the marketing slogan added classic detective game, which persists through the last 2002/2003 edition. In the UK, Cluedo did not start using the Great Detective Game marketing slogan until the mid-1950s, which it continued using it until the 2000 edition when it adopted the classic detective game slogan. However, in the mid-1950s Waddingtons also adopted a Sherlock Holmes-type detective to adorn their box covers for a brief time, though unlike the US editions, there was no acknowledgement that the character was actually the famous detective. In the 1980s, as in the US, Sherlock Holmes also appeared in TV advertising of the time, along with other classic detectives such as Sam Spade. Notable additions: Cluedo, 50th Anniversary, also released as Clue, 50th Anniversary. This standard edition came in a deluxe format with the option to play with an extra murder weapon, a bottle of poison. This edition was also issued in a miniaturized Cluedo European travel version. Drew Struzan provided artwork for the game, which was originally created for the US 1996 edition and additionally used for the limited gift edition and the US Clue card game. Clue Nostalgia Edition: Hasbro began offering a retro nostalgia edition of the game, essentially a reissue of the 1963 design in a wooden box. A custom version of the game was also released in the US by Restoration Hardware's wooden box Clue with different cover art. In the UK it was released under the Cluedo brand, and was an official reissue of the original 1949 Waddingtons design. Clue Vintage Edition, also released as Cluedo Vintage Edition, Hasbro reformatted the Nostalgia Edition into a vintage bookshelf collection along with a series of other popular board games. In the Cluedo version, they continued to use the 1963 design and adapted it for the UK market for the first time with localized characters and naming conventions. Spin-offs: Waddingtons, Parker Brothers and Hasbro have created many spin-off versions of the game. Spin-off games consist of alternative rule variations of the original classic detective game, which are not to be confused with themed variants, which uses the same rules and game configuration. In 1985, the brand expanded to include a feature film, television series, a musical, as well as numerous books. Games: in addition to revising the rules of gameplay, many of the games also introduced new characters, rooms and locations, weapons and/or alternative objectives. Clue VCR mystery game released as Cluedo, the Great Video Detective Game in the UK. It uses an hour-long VHS or beta tape containing humorous scenes of the suspects interacting at Boddy Mansion shortly after Mr. Boddy's death instead of a board. Players uncover details of several murders per game by matching clues given on cards to the action on the video. Only 5 weapons and 5 rooms are featured, but there are a total of 10 suspects. The video is known as the first videotape-related video game. Super Cluedo Challenge is an advanced version of the Cluedo rules, introducing 3 new characters and 3 more weapons. The rules are greatly expanded, with each card having colored and numbered squares in each corner, which are uncovered by special card holders. These allowed clues to be given by uncovering a small segment of the card, showing only a color number. Rather than the remaining cards being dealt out at the start of the game, they had to be discovered by reaching one of the many blue counters scattered on the board. Clue VCR 2, Murder in Disguise sequel to a Clue VCR mystery game. More scenarios with the same 10 characters from the first VCR game. The rooms this time around are the dining room, lounge, hall, billiard room, and hotel room. Cluedo Master Detective is an expanded version of the original game. In addition to the original characters, weapons and rooms, the game adds 4 characters, 2 weapons, and 7 rooms to the mansion. This version was also made into a video game. Clue Jr. Case of the Missing Pet. This game was a variant for children. The player played as one of the old 6 suspects, who are children, and try to find out who took the missing pet and where they hid it. Travel Clue. More than just a miniaturized version of the standard game is offered for the UK Cluedo editions. The first US travel edition is played somewhat differently. Instead of rolling dice, players simply choose a room to visit on their turn. Once there, they can see any cards in the room and question other players. Clue, The Great Museum Caper is rather different from the original. One player is a thief whose goal is to steal paintings while the other players attempt to apprehend the thief. The thief keeps track of his or her position secretly on paper and is thus not seen by the detectives, until the thief is spotted by a detective or the museum's security system. Ideally, multiple rounds are played, with each player getting to be the thief once. The winner of the match is then the thief who stole the most paintings without getting caught. Cluedo Card Game is a shedding-type card game, where players attempt to match cards featuring the locations, weapons, and characters from the original game with a central pile of cards. Clue Little Detective. Perhaps in one of the biggest departures from the standard game, the object of this game is to be the first to reach the front gate from the attic after hearing a scary noise. Junior Cluedo is the first junior game for Cluedo. Instead of finding the murder, the players need to find the ghost of their ancestors and remember where they are. Travel Clue Jr. Like the regular Travel Clue game, it is not merely a miniaturized version of the Clue Jr. series, but a unique format with its own set of rules. Instead of rolling dice, a spinner is used, to move around the board for an opportunity to open a door and obtain a clue. Cluedo Super Sleuth is another advanced version of the Cluedo rules, though in a different manner. There is no set board to this game, instead the board is made up of 12 tiles which are laid out randomly as players enter new rooms, to create a 4x3 grid. The murder cards remain unchanged to the basic edition, but are not dealt to each player. Instead there are clue squares on the board marked by small plastic magnifying glasses, which players collect to get clues. In addition to the clue counters there are also item counters, which allow the player to pick a card from an item deck. These item cards allow such things as making more than one suggestion per turn, or moving an extra character. Extra characters in the game include a black dog, Inspector Gray and Hogarth the Butler. They can serve as help or hindrance and are controlled through the item and event cards. Event cards are drawn from a deck upon a certain roll of the die and can have varying impact on a game. Clue Jr. The Case of the Hidden Toys is themed for children. Instead of solving a murder, the children search for clues for the whereabouts of some lost toys. The rules are significantly different from those for the regular board game. The characters, which look like the original game's suspects as children, are named Mortimer Mustard, Georgie Green, Peter Plum, Wendy White, Polly Peacock and Samantha Scarlett. Cluedo, Passport to Murder was an update of Super Cluedo Challenge with the setting changed to an Orient Express-style train in Istanbul station. There is very little change to the mechanics of the game, with mainly cosmetic changes and updates to the characters. Cluedo Card Game is a different card game from the previous game, This time the user has to deduct the Dr. Black's killer, their escape vehicle and their destination. Cluedo SFX, released as ClueFX in the US and Super Cluedo Interactive in France, is another departure from the original rules. Each player plays as one of 4 new characters, adding the first non-Caucasian character since the early Asian Miss Scarlet, none of whom are suspected in the crime. The murder is not of Dr. Black but of his attorney Miles Meadowbrook. The usual suspects are in place, this time bolstered by 2 new people, Mrs. Meadowbrook and Rusty the gardener. The gameplay is completely different though, with the introduction of the electronics section announcing moves and clues and no die rolling. Instead, players move from location to location to track down each of the suspects to gain their clues, before finding Inspector Brown to make an accusation. Cluedo Jr., The Case of the Missing Cake, released under the Clue brand in North America, is another children's variation where the players have to find out who ate a piece of chocolate cake and with what drink. Cluedo Mysteries, released in the US as Clue Mysteries, this is another change of rules, and this time the gameplay is based heavily on another board game called Mysteries of Old Peking. Cluedo DVD game, released under the Clue brand in North America. This edition of the game has different rules based on DVD interaction. Instead of a murder, Dr. Black has had an item stolen and, in addition to guessing the criminal, location and stolen object, the time of day when the crime took place also has to be discovered. In each turn, players guess 3 of these 4 unknowns. And from time to time Inspector Brown and the butler, Ash, show up via the DVD with helpful information. Cluedo Party, the first murder mystery party game, similar to the How to Host a Murder franchise, but based around the classic 6 suspects. The kit includes props and invitations for up to 8 guests, and 2 different mysteries to solve. Clue Express, part of the Hasbro Express game series, players roll dice in this travel-sized edition to determine what actions they must take in deducing who was the brains, the brawn, and optionally the driver who planned and executed the crime. Cluedo, Discover the Secrets, released under the Clue brand in North America. This game was created in an effort to update what Hasbro considered to be an old-fashioned game. However, the traditional version of the game remained on sale as well. The game features new, up-to-date weapons, rooms, and suspects, as well as changes to the rules of gameplay. Cluedo, Carnival, The Case of the Missing Prize, is released under the Clue brand in North America. Set in a carnival atmosphere, another children's edition, introducing new rules with playing cards, and 2 levels of play. Clue, Secrets in Paris. This variant of the game features the same weapons as Discover the Secrets. The location has been changed to Paris, and the suspects are now youthful teenage versions of their adult counterparts, on a class field trip, who must discover which of their classmates has stolen a piece of art from the Louvre. Clue Suspect, not to be confused with Clue Suspects. This card game relies on players asking questions between turns to determine the facts of the crime. Clue Elimination is a variation of Clue that uses 4 Nerf Jolt X1 blasters. Cluedo, the classic mystery game, released under the Clue brand in North America. The first standard English-language Cluedo game to feature a bedroom and bathroom, it marks a return to the classic formula of 6 traditional weapons, and classic locations, albeit with a younger cast of characters. However, most notably absent are the clock cards introduced with Discover the Secrets in 2008, which could result in the eventual elimination of a player during the game. Players now start in the center of the board, rather than dedicated starting spaces, similar to Cluedo Master Detective. The rooms have slightly different names and are arranged differently around the game board. The victim and owner of the mansion is named Samuel Black in this version. This edition also has a different backstory of why the guests came to the mansion. The game also features 2-player rules, which is also a first in the standard edition US game. Clue, the classic mystery game. This version is very similar to the 2012 edition, and features a 2-sided, quarter-folded game board with a second crime scene on the reverse side. The main mansion game features a similar board with a few minor changes from the previous version. There is no longer an upstairs to the mansion. Rather, the rooms that were upstairs in the previous version are now located on the main floor. the bonus cards have been eliminated completely from the main game, and the spaces in the hallway are now laid stretcher bond style, allowing players to more quickly move throughout the mansion. The player tokens have also returned to their standard pawn look from classic versions. The reverse's side second crime scene is an outdoor boardwalk, with rooms that include an arcade, a jet ski rental, and a beach. This second side features the return of the bonus cards from the previous version, although there are now only 3 of them. Computer and video games. Various versions of the game were developed for Commodore 64, Atari ST, PC, Game Boy Advance, ZX Spectrum, Nintendo DS, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, CDI, Sega Mega Drive Genesis, PC, Mac, Xbox 360 and Apple iPhone/iPod Touch. Clue, Murder at Boddy Mansion, was released in 1998 for Microsoft Windows. In 1999 Cluedo Chronicles, Fatal Illusion was released, which was not based directly upon the board game, but instead uses the familiar characters and a new mystery. An arcade version of the game was released on a Netbox terminal which involves answering questions with a chance to win money. It is available in many pubs throughout the UK. In 1994 Euro 1996, there were 6 mysteries: The Hooded Madonna, Happy Ever After, Deadly Patent, Blackmail, The Road to Damascus, and Not in My Backyard, with actors. Clue Classic was released on June 3, 2008, developed by Games Cafe for Hasbro. It is a single-player interactive game based on the latest 2002/2003 classic detective game artwork featuring the original 6 characters, weapons and 9 original rooms. In May 2009 Electronic Arts released a version of Clue for the Apple iPhone and iPod Touch on the Apple iTunes Music Store. This version is an entirely new game, based on the most recent spin-off game of Clue, Discover the Secrets. Additionally, EA's games site Pogo has a hidden object game called ʻkluːdoʊ, Secrets and Spies, where each game is a 60-minute episode. Episodes are usually grouped into series of 2 or more. On the iWin website, there is a hidden object game called Clue, Accusations and Alibis. Film. A comedic film Clue, based on the American version of the game, was released in 1985. In this version, the person murdered was Mr. Boddy. The film, which featured different endings released to different theaters, failed at the box office, but has subsequently attracted a cult following. All 3 endings released to theaters are available on the VHS and DVD versions of the film, to watch one after the other, or to select playing one or all 3 endings. In 2008, Universal Pictures reported that Hasbro, the makers of Cluedo, had licensed several of its board games to the film company for feature film adaptations. Among these was Clue. Gore Verbinski was announced as director. Television, game shows. There have been several television game shows based upon this game. To date, there have been 4 seasons of the British version of Cluedo, and there have been other versions in Germany, France, Italy, Australia, Portugal and Scandinavia. The format for each puts 2 teams against 6 in-character actors as the famed color-coded suspects. There is a new murder victim every episode, who usually has it coming to them for one reason or another. Each episode uses different weapons. In the Christmas episode in the UK the 6 original weapons were used. TV series. On August 6, 2010, The Hub announced that an original 5-part miniseries based on Clue was in pre-production. The miniseries premiered on November 14, 2011 and featured a youthful, ensemble cast loosely based on the characters of the board game, working together to unravel a mystery. The short miniseries draws similarities to the original board game and mostly to the 2012 spin-off Clue, the classic mystery game which both featured the characters belonging or having ties to secret societies' houses and fitting closely with the character descriptions. Documentary. The Clue title and theme were used in the 1986 U.S. documentary Clue, Movies, Murders and Mystery which took a look at mystery-related pieces of media including Murder on the Orient Express, Murder, She Wrote, Sherlock Holmes and other television series and movies, as well as a look at the board game itself. The one-hour special was hosted by Martin Mull, who had starred in the feature film adaptation the previous year. Clips from the movie are seen intertwined with the footage. Musical. A comedic musical of Clue, based on the American version of the game, ran off-Broadway in 1997, closing in 1999. At the start of each performance, 3 audience members each select one card from oversized versions of the traditional game decks and place them in an envelope. The chosen cards determine the ending of the show, with 216 possible conclusions. Play, penned by Robert Duncan with the cooperation of Waddingtons, the first official theatrical adaptation of Cluedo was presented by the amateur theatre group, the Chain Players in Oxfordshire in July 1985. The play was subsequently picked up by Hiss and Boo Productions and began a successful tour of the UK. A second tour was undertaken in 1990. Like the musical, the play involved the audience's random selection of 3 solution cards which were revealed towards the end of the play, whereupon the actors would then conclude the play by performing one of the 216 endings possible. Presently the play is not available for performance due to a restriction by Hasbro, since Hasbro has been planning to make a new movie. It is unclear whether the restriction applies to the musical as well. Books. A series of 18 humorous children's books. Teen books were published in the United States by Scholastic Press between 1992 and 1997 based on the Clue concept and created by A. Parker. The books featured the U.S. Clue characters in short, comedic vignettes and asked the reader to follow along and solve a crime at the end of each. The answers are printed upside down with an explanation on the following page following each chapter to see if the reader was able to guess correctly or not. The crime would usually be the murder of another guest besides Mr. Boddy, a robbery of some sort, or a simple contest, in which case they must figure out who won. The 10th and final vignette would always be the murder of Mr. Boddy. Somehow, Mr. Boddy would always manage to cheat death, such as fainting before the shot was fired or being shot with trick bullets. However, at the end of the 18th book, Mrs. Peacock kills Mr. Boddy out of starvation and Mr. Boddy stays dead. The books feature mysterious-sounding titles such as Midnight Phone Calls, Footprints in the Fog, or The Secret Passage. These books are now out of print but can still be bought from various online retailers in both new and used conditions. In 2003, Canadian mystery writer Vicky Cameron wrote a new set of mini-mysteries, called the Clue Mysteries books. The series is geared toward a more adult audience while still retaining some comic absurdity as did the 1990s series. Only 2 were published. Both books feature more complex storylines and vocabulary, as well as 15 mysteries apiece. The first book contains the more modern-looking Clue game cover by Drew Struzan. Another book called Clue Code-Breaking Puzzles was released in December 2008 written by Helene Hovenk. The book contains a whopping 60 mysteries. A similar series of books featuring the Clue JR characters was also published. The first book, unlike the others, features 13 mysteries, not 10, and is titled simply enough Who Killed Mr. Boddy? The name of the book is usually the name of the 10th mystery in which Boddy is killed. The books notably depart from the film. Mr. Boddy is a trillionaire, and the guests are his friends. But since Boddy has his will made out to his friends, they each try to kill him at one point with the intent on cashing in on his will. The guests are all given some sort of defining characteristic for comic effect, as well as to help the reader discern the culprit. Colonel Mustard constantly challenges other guests to duels, Professor Plum often forgets things, even what he is doing or his own name, and Mr. Green is notoriously greedy. Mrs. Peacock is highly proper and will not stand for any lack of manners, the maid Mrs. White hates her employer and all the guests, and Miss Scarlet is beautiful and seductive. The traits all help the reader identify the guests. For example, if a mystery thief suddenly forgets what he is doing, and another guest scolds him for his bad manners, the reader can safely assume the 2 guests are Plum and Peacock. Mr. Boddy himself is ludicrously naive, to the point where he accepts any attempt to kill him as an accident or a misunderstanding, and invites the guests back to the mansion. This explains why he never seeks any legal action against his friends, and invited them back despite repeated attempts to kill him. However, after a few books, he wisses up enough to be suspicious of them, but continues to invite them over against better judgment. The Clue Junior series originally had all 6 characters, but suddenly, some of the characters were taken out, leaving only 4. The mysteries usually only included cases similar to the theft of a toy, but sometimes the cases were more serious. They are usually solved when the culprit traps himself in his own lies. Jigsaw Puzzles, a series of jigsaw puzzles, based on the game, was introduced in 1991. The jigsaw puzzles presented detailed stories with a biography for each of the standard suspects. The object was to assemble the jigsaw puzzles and then deduce the solutions presented in the mystery stories from the clues provided within the completed pictures. Variants: the following games are licensed thematic variations of the game, which follow the basic rules and configuration of the original classic detective game or its spin-offs. Clue: the Collector's Edition. After the success of the first Collector's 10th Anniversary Edition of Monopoly, a luxury edition of the game was produced by the Franklin Mint, the first edition to be published outside Parker Brothers. It is a 3-dimensional representation of the gammoboard encased in glass and wood with 24K gold-plated playing pieces and gammoboard accents. Drew Struzan provided Victorian-themed artwork for the game. It was also sold as Cluedo, however it used the North American localizations. Though only sold for a brief time, the edition was reissued in 2007 by Restoration Hardware as the Premier Edition, however it is a smaller, scaled-down version with gold-colored plastic pieces and accents which sold for significantly less. In 2009, Frontgate issued the Frontgate Edition, which was identical except with a white playing surface. In 2011, Frontgate reissued the Restoration Hardware Edition in an enhanced cabinet as the Luxury Edition. Clue Limited Gift Edition. This edition from Winning Moves came in a deluxe format with the option to play with an extra murder weapon, a poison chalice. It also utilized the 1996 U.S. Classic Detective Game Edition artwork by Drew Struzan. Alfred Hitchcock Edition. Clue is set on the soundstage where a number of Alfred Hitchcock unregistered trademark S films are being shot. This game is notable as the first to depict the characters portraying someone other than themselves. In this case, they have dressed up as their favorite Hitchcock characters. The Simpsons. Clue, also released as The Simpsons Cluedo, has players trying to find out who killed Mr. Burns and where in Springfield it happened. The first edition features Homer as Mr. Green, Bart as Professor Plum, Lisa as Miss Scarlet, Marge as Mrs. Peacock, Krusty as Colonel Mustard, and Mr. Smithers as Mrs. White. Early promotional material had Maggie as Mrs. White and Grandpa as Colonel Mustard. Later editions were published exclusively by Hasbro. The third edition has players determine who killed Mr. Burns in the Springfield Museum and reassigns the characters with Homer as Professor Plum, Bart as Colonel Mustard, Fat Tony as Mr. Green, Lisa as Mrs. Peacock, Edna Krabappel as Miss Scarlet, and Marge as Mrs. White. This is the first Clue game to depict other characters portraying the game's traditional characters. Clue Dungeons & Dragons was produced by Hasbro shortly after their purchase of Wizards of the Coast, owners of the Dungeons & Dragons license. The characters are D&D character types. The rooms depicted on the board are fantasy-themed, and the weapons also draw inspiration from the popular role-playing game. Gameplay is identical to standard Clue unless the optional Wandering Monsters deck is used. Using this deck, players must battle monsters when landing on special spaces on the board. The players must battle monsters via dice rolls and are rewarded with magic items that confer special powers. Clue The Haunted Mansion. This Disney Theme Park edition is based on the Haunted Mansion at Disney theme parks. One of the 6 guests in the house was scared by one of the 6 ghosts in one of the 9 rooms. The detail on the board draws from the scenes depicted in the Haunted Mansion attraction and contains hidden Mickeys. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Clue features Fred as Mr. Green, Shaggy as Professor Plum, Scooby as Colonel Mustard, Velma as Mrs. Peacock, Daphne as Miss Scarlet, and Mrs. White as their host. This edition takes place in a rundown version of the mansion with a cemetery. Clue, the card game, Mystery Beyond the Mansion. An original card game from Winning Moves. Players must deduce who killed Mr. Boddy, which vehicle they used to escape, and which direction they fled. Clue, first edition 1949 classic reproduction. Winning Moves released a reissue reproduction of the original 1949 US Clue edition. Accurate in every way, notable features include wooden pawns and the original string rope, as well as a pewter version of the traditional plastic rope. Dunhill Cluedo. Following in the vein of luxury editions of family board games, Dunhill released a custom edition of Cluedo designed by British game maker Geoffrey Parker. The game consisted of a hand-inlaid leather-clad box, with sterling silver playing pieces. The design won a British Interior Design Association Award in 2008. Clue. The Twilight Zone, Tower of Terror. This Disney theme park edition is based on the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror at Disney's Hollywood Studios theme park. Players try to discover who disappeared, where, and with which prop. The details of the characters, props, and rooms draw from the scenes depicted in the Tower of Terror attraction. This version also contains hidden Mickeys much like the Haunted Mansion version. Clue suspects a single-player logic puzzle version of the game developed by Winning Moves. Players are given a set of clues and must deduce the location of the murder and the murderer. This is a unique game concept licensed by Hasbro, first released by Winning Moves. Clue, Harry Potter Edition, also released as Cluedo, Harry Potter Edition, involves a student disappearing from the school. Players use the characters Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Luna or Neville to find how, when and what spell was used to attack the student. This variant, while loosely based on a reinvention makeover, is a major departure from traditional gameplay and constitutes a spin-off in its own right, as it includes along with the standard complement of equipment, help cards, dark cards, mystery cards, house point tokens, and a variable configuration game board which changes during the course of play. Clue, the card game, Mystery at Sea. A second card game from Winning Moves, this one imagines the suspects on a luxury yacht. Utilizing a small playing board, players use action cards to solve the crime. Notable for not only the setting at sea, but the introduction of Mr. Boddy as a potential suspect. Players actually determine which of the 7 characters is to be the victim prior to play. Clue, 24 edition has players attempt to find out which character is about to launch one of 9 attacks from within CTU. Clue, the Office edition players at the Dunder Mifflin office are instructed by their boss Michael Scott to find out who killed HR rep Toby Flenderson. Clue, Seinfeld Collector's Edition has players attempt to determine who bonked Newman on the head and hid his scandalous tabloid exposing the suspect's secrets. Clue, Juicy Couture was produced as part of Usaopoli custom corporate game service for U.S. clothing designer Juicy Couture. Players take on the role of one of 6 characters as they attempt to determine who stole what couture item in the fashion line was stolen, who took it, and where the item is hidden before the fashion show begins the next day. Clue, the Classic Edition. Another standard edition produced by Winning Moves, combines design elements from its limited gift edition and its 1949 reissue edition, to produce a new traditional edition of the game using the original 6 suspects, weapons and 9 rooms. The first of its kind released since the introduction of the Discover the Secret spin-off game in 2008. Clue, Family Guy Collector's Edition has players attempt to determine who killed the giant chicken. Clue Bookshelf Board Game. A faux leather-bound bookshelf edition based on the traditional game format. Released by Frontgate in a limited and numbered distribution, this edition is notable as the first re-release of an enhanced 1986 Parker Brothers edition, and the first reissue that was not based on either the 1949 or 1963 editions. Clue Library Classic Book. Yet another faux leather bookshelf edition, as part of a classic games collection by Winning Solutions. This edition marks a reissue of the traditional 1949 design. Giant Clue Deluxe Wood Edition released as part of Winning Solutions' Giant Game series. This game is notable as the largest traditional Clue edition, measuring 24 square. Based on the Franklin Mint artwork, this reissue flattens the board to a typical 2D presentation, but offers movable gold-tone centerpiece sculptures for each room, as well as deluxe gold-tone playing tokens. This same year they also reissued the smaller traditional 3D version first sold by Restoration Hardware. ʻkluːdoʊ SpongeBob SquarePants edition based on Cluedo Jr., The Case of the Missing Chocolate Cake Rules, players help discover who stole SpongeBob's jellyfish net. Cluedo, Sherlock edition instructs players to find out who killed Moriarty. Cluedo, London edition, the first of several regionalised editions planned by Winning Moves. Using locations around London, players must determine which prominent citizens committed murder. Cluedo, Edinburgh edition, in a public vote Edinburgh beat out Dublin, Glasgow and Manchester to become the next regional Cluedo game. Apart from featuring Edinburgh locations, it also includes new Edinburgh-themed suspects such as Alec Mustard, Mrs. Morningside Peacock, Kathleen White, Professor Emmett Plum, Gillespie Green and Poppy Scarlet. The first character, Alec Mustard, was remarked to be similar to First Minister at the game's release Alex Salmond. Clue, Big Bang Theory edition, a tie-in with the CBS show, The Big Bang Theory. Sheldon Cooper must solve which of his friends betrayed him, where they did it and how. Unlicensed variants, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Mystery at Hogwarts game. 2000, this variant of Cluedo has the players trying to find out which student cast which forbidden spell in which room in Hogwarts School. One of the small rules changes is that players must go to an extra room to make their final accusations. The suspects are Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, Draco Malfoy, Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle. Mystery Museum, the Biblical Artifacts detective game. A version of Cluedo but with evangelical Christian elements to it. In the game, 6 people of different professions visit a Bible history museum and steal one of the artifacts. It must be determined who is the thief, which artifact they stole, and where they hid it. Throughout the game, players learn about the Bible. Mysterio, a version of Cluedo produced by Spanish company CFAR with horror elements to it. The gamut represents a castle with the following rooms: library, salon, laboratory, cellar, crypt, bedchamber, garage, hallway and the secret room. The victim is the count, the countess, the maid, the gardener, the butler or the housekeeper. And finally, instead of weapons, there are murderers, which are represented by classic horror characters: Count Dracula, the Wolf Man, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a ghost, the Mummy and Frankenstein's monster. It must be determined who is the victim, which monster killed him/her, and where was the murder committed. The gameplay is very similar, but there is also a wild card called the Salem's Witch, and the player who receives this card can see one of the solution cards, obtaining a great strategic advantage. Cluedo, Discover the Secrets. On August 8, 2008, Hasbro redesigned and updated the board, characters, weapons, and rooms. Changes to the rules of gameplay were made, some to accommodate the new features. The suspects have new given names and backgrounds, as well as differing abilities that may be used during the game. The revolver is now a pistol, the lead pipe has been removed, and a bat, axe, and trophy have been added. The 9 rooms have changed to hall, guest house, dining room, kitchen, patio, spa, theatre, living room, and observatory. There is also a second deck of cards, the intrigue cards. In this deck, there are 2 types of cards, keepers and clocks. Keepers are special abilities. For example, you can see the card. There are 8 clocks, the first 7 drawn do nothing, whoever draws the 8th is killed by the murderer and out of the game. The player must move to the indoor swimming pool in the center of the board to make an accusation. This adds some challenge versus the ability to make accusations from anywhere in the original game. The most significant change to gameplay is that once the suspect cards have been taken, the remaining cards are dealt so that all players have an even number of cards. This means that depending on the number of players, a number of cards are left over. These cards are placed face down in the middle and are not seen unless a player takes a turn in the pool room to look at them. The changes to the game have been criticized in the media for unnecessarily altering classic cultural icons. The game has also been criticized by lovers of the original game. As of December 2012, Hasbro no longer sells the game via its website. Worldwide differences. Besides some rule differences listed above, some versions label differently the names of characters, weapons, rooms and in some instances the actual game itself. In Canada and the US, the game is known as Clue. It was retitled because the traditional British board game Ludo, on which the name is based, was less well known there than its American variant Parcheesi. The North American versions of Clue also replaced the character Reverend Green from the original Cluedo with Mr. Green. This is the only region to continue to make such a change. Minor changes include Miss Scarlet with her name being spelt with one T, the spanner being called a wrench, and the dagger renamed a knife. And until 2003, the lead piping was known as the lead pipe only in the North American edition. In some international versions of the game the colors of some pieces are different, so as to correspond with the changes to each suspect's unique foreign name variations. In some cases, rooms and weapons are changed in addition to other regional variances. In South America it is licensed and sold under several different names. In particular, it is notably marketed as Deduce in Brazil. In Norway it was first released as Scotland Yard by Dam. It was later re-released as Cluedo, but the rules are the same. Merchandising: the Clue and Cluedo brands are well merchandised through umbrellas, books, toys, clothing and other miscellaneous items. See also, List of Cluedo characters, Clue, 13 Dead End Drive, Kill Dr. Lucky Mystery. Orient Express, Whodunit, references. External links, Clue official website Hasbro, 50th anniversary website official 1999 a €2000 product line. ckluːdoʊ.com a detailed resource, including information on film and television productions, list of international Cluedo Clue editions at ckluːdoʊ.com. theartofmurder.com a well-organized and detailed site maintained by a US collector, Pete's Cluedo fan site a detailed site with component images from every edition of the game. Cluedo at Board Game Geek.